Welcome back, guys, to Blackout War Stories. 66% of you still haven't subscribed. Before we start the video, hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. Thank you. It was deep in the Monongahela forest, early fall of 2006, when we reached the ridge. The trees stood so close the wind barely moved between them. We had been searching for 5 days, chasing a signal that blinked and vanished like it was alive. I expected wreckage, maybe fire marks, maybe the smell of fuel. Instead, the Black Hawk sat upright in the laurel patch, clean, like it had been parked there on purpose. No crew. No blood, no drag lines. Just the doors open and the inside neat, almost careful. One of the men said the air felt wrong. He was right. Something in that hollow was waiting for us to notice it. The order came down late on a Sunday. We were told a UH-60 had dropped off radar during a night navigation run somewhere over Randolph County, near the high ridges that cut through the Monongahela forest. The flight was marked as a routine training hop out of the Guard Airfield in Clarksburg. The crew of 4 were all local. I knew the crew chief Danner from gunnery practice 2 summers before. He was steady, careful, not the kind who messed with weather or fuel. They said the bird vanished in fair skies. No distress call. No fire seen. The emergency locator beacon had stayed silent for nearly a week, then blinked once on the 5th day. That was why they called us. I was part of a maintenance detachment on temporary standby. We could move light and stay quiet. Officially, we were a recovery team. Unofficially, we were told not to involve the press or county rescue until after we made contact with the site. Our small convoy reached the ranger station at the forest edge by mid-morning. 3 trucks, 6 men, and 1 officer. The officer wore no name tag, just a subdued Major's oak leaf. He said little, only that we would search grid by grid using ELT coordinates. He brought his own radio pack, a civilian model painted green. The station chief handed us maps already marked with restricted zones, old mining areas sealed off since the 30s. The lines crossed right where the beacon had last pinged. We camped at a pull-off near a dry creek bed that first night. The forest was heavy, close. Pines crowded the road cut and fog clung low, making our headlights smear the ground. I cleaned my rifle, checked my pack, and listened to the hum of insects cutting through the dark. The medic, Ruiz, joked that nothing dies clean in these woods. The others kept quiet. Every few minutes, the radio hissed with that faint tick, slow, steady, almost like a pulse. The major didn't speak about it, but he listened longer than the rest of us. The next morning, we pushed up an old logging road. It twisted around the slope, slick with mud and leaf rot. We moved in a staggered line, packs digging into our shoulders. The smell of old fuel and wet iron came and went with the wind. I kept marking distance by creek bends and ridgeline breaks, the way we were trained when GPS dropped out. By the second bend, we lost signal entirely. The major said we would continue blind, compass only. By noon, we reached the ridge where the signal had flickered. The ground leveled into a narrow shelf lined with laurel and young spruce. The sunlight barely touched the floor. That was when we saw the first sign, the small flare casing half buried in the mud, still capped. Beside it, a strip of torn MRE pouch. I knew the type, standard issue, same lot we packed. It wasn't weathered enough to be 5 days old. Someone had been there after the reported crash. The major took pictures, measured spacing between the items with a strip of cord, and wrote something in a small black notebook. When I asked about the spacing, he said it matched a signal pattern. I didn't press. We moved on another few hundred yards to a clearing that sloped toward a hollow. There we found a patch of ground flattened as if by rotor wash, but no scorch marks, no debris trail. It looked like the chopper had landed clean. Danner would never risk a tight patch like that unless he meant to come back up. At camp that night, the major briefed us by the fire. His tone was flat, practiced. He said our objective was to locate the aircraft, secure flight data components, and retrieve any sensitive cargo. He didn't define sensitive. He also said quietly that if we found the crew alive, we were to keep them at sight until he arrived. That phrasing, if we found, didn't sit right with any of us. It meant someone higher already doubted they were missing in the usual way. The wind picked up after midnight. The trees creaked, long and tired. I woke twice thinking I heard rotors far off, but the sound never moved, just hung there like an echo. The tick on the radio had stopped. I remember lying in my bag, staring up through the tent mesh, thinking how the woods seemed to lean inward as if listening. At dawn, we broke camp and headed east toward the hollow marked on our grid. The fog was thick enough to hide our boots. Each of us felt at some tension under the calm. The air smelled faintly of coolant, sweet and wrong in the middle of the forest. That was the first sign the wreck wasn't going to match any normal crash. We started early the next morning, pushing deeper along the ridge. The fog sat low, cutting sound and light both. Our boots sank in wet moss. Every few hundred yards, the major halted, listening to something in his headset. None of us could hear it, but he kept nodding like he was tracing a signal. By mid-morning, we dropped into a narrow hollow lined with black birch. The air felt cooler there, still and heavy. Ruiz said the smell had changed. He was right. It wasn't forest anymore. It smelled faintly of burned wiring and antifreeze. We came to a broken stretch of road, half swallowed by mud. That's where we found the tail boom. It lay clean, not shattered, the paint unburned. Someone had cut it free. I ran my hand along the edge. It was smooth, almost polished, not torn by impact. No tool marks either. The major took one look and told us to leave it. He said the rest of the bird was farther in. Another mile and we hit the old fire road that the map said should end at a mine gate. The mine had been sealed since the 30s, according to local records. Yet the trees near the entrance had been cleared in the last few months. The stumps were fresh, the bark still pale. We made camp nearby, in the shelter of an old culvert. The major said we pushed toward the beacon site at first light. That night, the radio tick returned. Not the usual steady beat, but slower, almost thoughtful. It came through every channel, no matter the frequency. We tried swapping batteries. Same thing. Ruiz suggested interference from a repeater tower, but there wasn't one for miles. I sat awake long after the others slept, watching the fog move in sheets between the trees. Sometimes it looked like light behind glass, shifting colorless. When dawn came, we moved along the creek bed that cut behind the mine. The ground dipped and rose, uneven. My knees burned with each climb. We stopped often to check bearings, but the compass needle dragged. I've never seen that before. The major didn't seem surprised. He just told us to stay close. By midday, we crested a small ridge and saw the glint through the trees, the chopper's windshield catching sunlight. It sat in a dense pocket of laurel, upright, nose pointed west, rotor still tied. The grass under the skids was flattened, but there were no drag marks, no gouges. It hadn't crashed. It had landed. We approached slowly, rifle slung but ready. The cabin door hung open, swinging a little in the wind. Inside was clean. No glass, no blood, no trace of panic. Even the flight manuals were still in their pouches. The only odd thing was the smell sharp, like coolant and hot metal mixed with damp leaves. The instrument panel still carried faint heat. I checked the battery, dead cold. Yet the ticking sound came again, faint but steady, from somewhere in the wiring. The major climbed into the cockpit. He touched the throttle, nodded once, and stepped out. "This isn't a crash," he said. None of us answered. He told us to sweep outward, 30-yard intervals, mark anything unnatural. I moved down the slope, following a thin game trail. The mud there held prints, boot prints, 4 sets, same tread as ours. They led away from the chopper, looped once, and broke into the trees. About 50 yards out, they stopped. Just ended. The ground beyond was smooth, undisturbed. I brushed the leaves, looking for heel marks. Nothing. By afternoon, we gathered what little we found. A dropped flight glove. A cracked chem light never activated. A scrap of paper with half a serial number. The major bagged each piece, labeling them with codes we didn't recognize. He said we'd extract in the morning and call in a second team for recovery. That night, none of us slept. The air had a charge to it, faint but constant, like the tension before lightning. Ruiz thought he heard someone calling, far off, a man's voice low and short, maybe Danner's. We followed it for a while, sweeping the tree line with flashlights, but the sound always came from deeper in. The major didn't let us chase it far. He said voices carry strangely in these hollows. We packed at dawn. The plan was to haul out the black boxes first, then secure whatever cargo the major wanted from the rear bay. I noted fuel lines intact, tanks sealed, no sign of leakage. The instruments looked untouched. The engine cowling had finger smudges and the dust fresh. Whoever had been there last wasn't long gone. The major kept quiet through the climb back to camp. He carried his notebook under his arm, the pages marked with neat lines of timestamps. That's when I noticed he'd drawn the tick pattern, spacing each mark like a code. He closed it quick when he saw me looking. By nightfall, he called higher on his private handset. I only heard fragments. The words, "case secured, no contact, and maintain perimeter." After that, the forest fell still again. The fog rolled in heavier than before, muffling every sound. That was the night I realized we weren't the first to reach that hollow. Someone else had already been there and left something behind. We moved out at first light, following the creek that curved north from the hollow. The major said we'd sweep the low ground before climbing back to the ridge. The air hung wet and still. No birds. Even the wind seemed to have left the forest. Every sound we made felt louder than it should have. My boots slid on the rocks, slick with moss and coal dust. We were supposed to reach an open cut where the old mine trail began. But halfway there, Ruiz spotted something, an empty canteen wedged in the mud, cap still on. It was standard issue, same batch as ours. No dents, no dirt inside, just left sitting upright. 10 yards farther, we found another item, a torn heater sleeve from an MRE. Then a strip of duct tape, folded tight, placed on a flat rock like someone marking a line. The pattern stretched ahead, one object every few dozen steps. Not random, two even. The major followed each point, measuring the gaps with his boot heel. He didn't say what he saw in it, but he kept the notebook open, writing small numbers in the margin. When we reached the end of the trail, the last item was a snap radio antenna. No sign of struggle. No animal tracks, just silence. I walked ahead, scanning the brush. The ground sloped toward a depression where water pooled black. There, beneath a thin layer of leaves, we found the sealed mine entrance. The boards had been replaced recently, clean cut, not rotted. A rusted sign beside it read, "No entry, hazard." The letters were almost gone. We gathered close, checking the area. The smell hit us first like hot wiring mixed with coal dust. It was faint, but wrong. I remember rubbing my glove against my nose and tasting metal in the air. The major squatted, brushed away dirt, and tapped the boards, hollow beneath. Then he placed his hand flat against them and whispered something I didn't catch. Our radio crackled then, breaking the silence. The same steady tick came through, slower now, like he was counting distance. Ruiz checked the battery. It was warm to the touch. The major smiled in a strange way and said we'd hold a perimeter until dusk. He marked positions with stakes, 50 yards apart, and told us to stay put. I took the western side, facing uphill. The forest there was dense, young trees packed tight. The sun dipped low, throwing the ridge in shadow. I could hear water trickling from somewhere under the slate pile, but the sound had rhythm too steady to be run off. Every few minutes it paused, then started again. Around dusk, I saw movement near the mine. Not a person exactly, more like a shape shifting where light thinned. I called it in, but the major told me to hold fire. He said not to draw attention. I lowered my rifle, kept watching. The fog crept in again, sliding along the ground in strips. When it reached my boots, the smell grew stronger, sweet and chemical, like coolant worn by a running engine. By night, we set up a small camp by the creek. The major sat apart, flipping through his notes. Ruiz cleaned his rifle, though we hadn't fired a shot. The others ate in silence. I tried to write coordinates in my log, but the compass needle drifted each time I held it near the ground. Something in the soil must have been magnetic. Just before midnight, the major called me over. He asked if I'd noticed anything unusual about the noise. I told him it came in even gaps, like the beacon pulse from the locator, but softer. He said, "Count between beats next time." When I did, it wasn't even. It staggered, two long, one short, repeat. I recognized the pattern. Old school Morse. The spacing was faint, but the signal spelled stand. That word hung in my head the rest of the night. I didn't tell the others. The major never explained it. At dawn, he said we were moving to higher ground to reestablish comms. We climbed back toward the old fire tower marked on the map. The trail wound steep and narrow. Halfway up, we came across a metal pole driven into the ground with a small box at its base. It was half buried, disguised under leaves. A coaxial cable ran from it down toward the mine. The box gave off a soft hum, constant and deep. None of our equipment registered it. The major said to leave it untouched. I didn't argue, but I took note of the direction. It ran straight into the hollow. He wrote another time mark in his book, then told us to move. By the time we reached the tower site, the air had turned warm and still again. The old wooden structure leaned east, half collapsed. The view stretched out over miles of ridge and fog-filled valleys. The major unpacked the radio and tuned through channels. For a moment, we caught a clear tone, then it cut to static. Over that static, a faint voice came through, 3 words before it broke off. Hold until signal. Then silence. The major nodded once, calm as if he expected it. He said we'd regroup and wait. Ruiz muttered that this wasn't rescue work anymore. None of us disagreed. We took turns watching the ridge below. Just before dark, I saw a light flash down near the mine entrance. A white glow, steady, not flickering like a fire. I called it out. The major didn't move. He said, "Let it pass." The light faded a few seconds later, gone as if someone switched it off. The radio stayed quiet after that. Only the slow tick remained, steady again, marking the dark. The next morning, mist covered the tower. The wood was damp and slick. We climbed anyway, hoping for a clear signal. The major stayed below, listening through his headset. From up top, the forest stretched endless ridges rolling like waves, each one darker than the last. No movement anywhere, no smoke, no birds. Just the steady wind pressing through the trees like a slow breath. Ruiz radioed down that we had contact from command. The message was brief. Recover flight data recorders. Secure site. Do not pursue personnel. That was all. No mention of rescue. No mention of the crew. Ruiz's jaw tightened. "They're writing them off," he said. The major didn't deny it. He told us to pack for descent. We split into 2 teams. Ruiz stayed at the tower with 1 mechanic to maintain comms. I went down with the major and the other mechanic, Davis, to pull the data boxes from the wreck. It took us 3 hours to reach the hollow again. The fog had thinned, but the smell was stronger, burned wiring mixed with wet soil. The chopper looked the same as before, except the cabin door had swung fully open. The hinges were clean, no rust, as if someone had oiled them overnight. Inside, dust floated in pale light. I crawled beneath the pilot seat, unscrewing panels with my multi-tool. The black boxes were intact, no fire damage. When I lifted the casing, a faint hum passed through the metal. It wasn't battery noise, it was something deeper, like vibration from inside the hull. I shut it off quick. The major slid the recorder into a padded bag and sealed it. While Davis checked the tail rotor assembly, I noticed new tracks by the skids. Not boot prints this time, barefoot impressions. Light, leading toward the creek. Each step was precise, heel to toe. The mud around them was cold, as if recently turned. I followed the trail until it stopped at the water's edge. Nothing beyond, no splash marks, no drag. Just vanished. The major called me back. He'd found something under the rear bench. A small steel case with handles, about the size of a lunchbox, painted black with no markings. The latch was sealed with lead wire. He stared at it for a long moment, then slipped it into his pack. "Classified cargo," he said. "Do not log this." That was the first order he gave that I hesitated on, but I nodded anyway. We started back toward the tower. Halfway up the slope, the radio came alive again, this time with a low, rhythmic buzz. Ruiz's voice broke through, distorted. Movement, behind, ridge, then static. We stopped. The forest went quiet, not even the hum of insects. The major motioned for silence. From somewhere to our left, deep in the trees, came a faint metallic clink, like chain brushing metal. Then another, closer. We raised rifles, scanning the brush. No wind, no movement. I thought it might be an animal, until the sound paused for a few beats, then repeated in the same pattern as the ticking, even intervals, deliberate. The major watched the tree line for a long time, then said, "They're still moving." We pushed on faster after that. The climb burned through our legs. The radio went dead again, except for one short burst of sound, a burst that matched the same pattern we'd heard all along. The Morse spacing spelled one word again, stand. The major didn't acknowledge it, but I saw his hand tighten on the pack strap. When we reached the tower, Ruiz was waiting with a message pad in hand. He said the signal strength had fluctuated, like something else was transmitting on the same frequency. His face looked pale. "The last time it spiked," he said, "the tower shadow pointed straight toward that mine." We rested there, trying to piece things together. The major set up a small reader for the data box, connecting it through a field laptop. The screen lit weakly, static lines crawling across. Then came the playback log engine performance, airspeed, coordinates, everything normal until the final minutes. The data showed the chopper had landed, engines spooled down, then restarted 20 minutes later, lifted and relocated. Not a crash at all. Davis frowned. "That can't be right. They said the signal stopped that night." The major didn't answer. He only scrolled to the last entry. The log ended with a time code 2 hours after the supposed loss. The aircraft had flown again and powered off near our current grid. That meant someone had flown it here after the official search began. Ruiz stared at the major. "So they didn't crash," the major said, "not here." His tone made it clear we weren't supposed to ask where. Evening came early under the thick canopy. We built a small fire near the base of the tower, careful to keep it low. The forest around us was silent again. I felt that same weight in the air, like the ground itself was holding its breath. Somewhere below, faint light flickered once between the trees. I could tell the others saw it too. Ruiz reached for his rifle, but the major stopped him. "We wait," he said. The light moved once more, like a lantern carried slowly through brush, then faded. The smell of burned wire drifted up the slope. I knew then that whatever was moving down there wasn't Lost Crew. It was something else using their path. Before I turned in, I checked the compass again. The needle spun slow, pointing not north but toward the hollow where the chopper sat. The ticking returned on the radio, louder now, filling the night with even, steady gaps. Ruiz whispered that it felt like heartbeat distance apart. None of us slept. We waited for morning, unsure who would still be there to see it. By dawn, our eyes were raw from staring into fog. The forest was still. Ruiz brewed instant coffee over the coals, his hands shaking. The major had not slept. He sat on a log with the black box and his notebook open, tracing the same pattern of lines again and again. The tick on the radio had gone silent sometime before sunrise. The silence felt heavier than the noise. He finally spoke just before we packed. "We go back to the aircraft," he said. "We left something important behind." He didn't explain, and none of us asked. We reached the hollow by late morning. The light barely reached the ground there. I walked ahead, half expecting to see the chopper gone. It wasn't, but something had changed. The rotor blades were tied again, only tighter this time, new cord on the knots. The cockpit glass was wiped clean of the dust I'd seen the day before. Fresh footprints circled the nose. Same tread as ours, but deeper. Inside the cabin, the panels we'd opened were closed and screwed tight. Even the bolts had torque paint reapplied. Whoever had done it knew maintenance procedure by the book. I checked my log from the previous day. The entries matched, except for the last line. My handwriting ended with a timestamp written in pencil, but a second number followed, same style, not mine. The major climbed in beside me and looked over the gauges. He pointed to a note scratched into the metal with a key or knife. It read, "Pre-flight complete, 2100. The date matched the night after the chopper disappeared. That couldn't be possible. The crew would have been declared missing for nearly 2 days by then. I turned to him, but he already knew what it meant. "They came back," he said, "or someone did for them." We moved to the rear bay. The spot where the steel case had been was empty now, just a faint imprint in the dust. The major's jaw set. He checked his pack. It was still there, but he looked at it as if expecting it to vanish too. Outside, Davis called us over. He'd found more prints leading from the creek toward the mine, this time mixed, some booted, some bare. The stride was even, not stumbling. Whoever walked there had direction. I noticed drag marks, narrow like a stretcher line, cutting straight for the sealed boards. The major didn't call it a rescue. He just stared at the trail, then said, "We're going down there before nightfall." We waited until the sun dropped behind the ridge. The air was cold and smelled of metal and wet rock. The major unpacked line rope, masks, and glow sticks. I carried a small flashlight clipped to my shoulder strap, extra batteries taped to my wrist. Davis took the shotgun. Ruiz volunteered to stay outside with the radio. The mine opening looked different up close. The slate around it had shifted, forming a narrow wedge where air pushed through in slow bursts. The boards were firm but new, the nails bright. When we pried one loose, the smell of old coal poured out, thick and oily. Beneath that was another scent, sweet, like burnt plastic. We tied off the main line and went in, keeping 3-yard spacing. The beam from my light caught wet walls lined with crystals of old saltpeter. Water dripped from the ceiling in a steady rhythm, close enough to the tick we'd been hearing that my stomach turned. The floor sloped down, slick with mud. Every few yards, chalk marks appeared on the wall circles with hash lines in pairs, pointing deeper. At the first junction, we found what looked like a small cache, an empty crate, some torn ration packs, and a broken headset. I tested the headset with our spare radio. It came alive just long enough to play that same coded spacing. Long, short, short, long. Then silence. The major crouched beside the crate and found a glove tucked under the rim. It was a flight glove, name tag half worn. Danner, no blood, no tears, no dirt. Like it had been set there. He didn't speak for a long time. When he stood, he looked older. We went farther, maybe another 100 yards. The air changed thicker, warmer, carrying that metallic taste again. My light flickered, dimmed, then steadied. The tunnel widened into a chamber. The walls were black with soot. In the center, someone had drawn a large ring of white dust, maybe chalk or crushed limestone. Inside it, nothing. Just bare rock. The major stepped close, studying it. "Perimeter markers," he said, voice low. "Old containment style." That made no sense to me. We weren't chem troops. He set the steel case down near the wall, like he was matching it to the circle's edge. For the first time, I noticed the latch seal was broken. He hadn't done it. He glanced at me. "We pull out now. We've seen enough." His tone was final. I didn't argue. As we turned back, a faint knocking echoed from deeper in. One strike, then another, each spaced by long pauses. It came from ahead, the direction we were leaving. Davis froze. "Wind?" he whispered. The major shook his head. "Count the gaps." We did. The timing matched the Morse cadence again, 2 short, 1 long. We hurried out without talking. The knocking followed until the slate lightened and the air cooled. Outside, Ruiz was pale. He said the radio had burst into static 5 minutes earlier, filling with what sounded like breathing. The light by the mine mouth dimmed, then brightened again, like a pulse. That was when the major finally said what none of us wanted to hear. "It's not the crew that's missing," he said quietly. "It's the line between who was here first and who came after." He stared into the hollow, listening to something I couldn't hear. We stayed near the mine until morning, too uneasy to sleep. The fog pressed thick against the trees. Ruiz kept checking the radio even though we all knew it wouldn't answer. Every few minutes it hissed and died again. When the sun finally came, the forest looked washed out, colorless. The mine mouth had shifted during the night. The top board sat crooked now, like something had pushed it from inside. The major said nothing for a while. Then he told us to pack up. "We're heading to the clearing north of here," he said. "There's another signal point, might be our people." His tone had changed, less command, more calculation. He carried the black box in his hand, not the pack. We followed an old trail up through scrub oak. The ground was soft, eaten by roots. I marked distance by ridges again, maybe 3 ridges between us and the tower site. At the first ridge, Davis called me over. He'd found new prints, same boot tread, same direction as ours, but the spacing was longer, like someone moving fast. I counted 8 before they veered into the brush. Past that, the ground was smooth, untouched. By midday, we reached a shelf overlooking a valley choked with fog. The air was cooler there. The major set the black box on a rock and opened a small reader device. When the data scrolled across the screen, he didn't look surprised. He only said, "They landed twice." The flight log confirmed what we'd already guessed. The chopper had powered down at another ridge first, coordinates close to the Spruce Knob site, an old signal station that was supposed to have been shut down years earlier. It took off again an hour later and came here. The major scrolled farther. A second set of flight inputs showed after the last known crew entry, but the ID code for the pilot field had been overwritten by blank space. Whoever flew it the second time wasn't in the system. Davis leaned in. "Could it have been remote?" The major shook his head. "Manual controls, trim inputs, torque readings, cyclic corrections. Someone was flying it." He studied the timestamps, then glanced toward the valley. They were told to pick up something from that site. A small pallet. It wasn't in the manifest. He tapped the sealed case with his boot. "This." None of us asked what was in it. It didn't matter anymore. The more we saw, the more it felt like we were the ones being guided instead of searching. Ruiz tried to raise command again, but the radio only returned a faint echo of our own transmission. A second later, it repeated the words back with a delay, our own voices, same tone, same phrasing. We switched frequencies. It followed. The major shut it off. That evening, we returned to the tower site for cover. The sun sank behind the western ridge, leaving the forest in blue shadow. The air had gone still again. We sat in a circle, eating cold rations. Nobody spoke much. When darkness came, I checked my compass once more. The needle didn't point north. It turned toward the hollow, same as before. I could almost feel the pull in my chest, a faint rhythm matching that invisible tick. Ruiz muttered that he kept hearing something like low static in his head, a faint buzz that rose and fell in time with his heartbeat. Davis said it too. The major stood apart, smoking quietly. The glow of his cigarette moved slow in the dark. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. "You ever wonder why we were called so late, 5 days after the beacon went silent? It was never a search. They already knew where it was." Ruiz asked what he meant. The major didn't look up. They needed confirmation to prove the signal was still transmitting from inside the forest. Davis frowned. "You mean from that box?" The major shook his head. "From something that box was connected to. The knob station was a SIGINT relay. It recorded low-band communication through underground lines. They buried some of those systems in the hills. Nobody ever pulled them out. If the crew brought something back from there, it wasn't equipment. It was a link." He looked straight at me. "That's why we don't find bodies. They walked into whatever they turned on. None of us spoke after that. The fire burned low. I listened to the night, the crackle of damp wood, the faint sigh of the wind through trees. Somewhere below, a single light blinked once near the mine and went out again. I didn't sleep. Around midnight, I checked the radio despite his orders. The static came alive, faint but steady. Behind it, a voice whispered, clear, calm, matching Danner's tone, hold for retrieval. Then nothing. The signal didn't fade like normal. It cut clean, like someone flipped a switch. When I looked up, the Major was watching me. You heard it too, he asked. I nodded, he said. Then tomorrow, we end this. He picked up the sealed case and turned toward the ridge where the mine waited. We started before dawn. The fog hugged the valley, low and still. The Major led, carrying the sealed case strapped tight to his chest. None of us talked. The forest was quiet enough to hear our boots sink in the mud. My pack felt twice as heavy, though I'd left half of it at the tower. Ruiz stayed behind to keep a link open with command, even if no one answered. He said if we weren't back by night, he'd start hiking out. The Major didn't reply. The trail down to the mine was narrow and slick. The mist thickened the lower we got. It clung to our faces, warm and damp, carrying that same chemical smell from before. The sound of water dripped somewhere under the ground, slow, even, measured. I started matching my steps to it without thinking, then stopped myself. When we reached the mouth, the boards were gone. The slate had shifted again, revealing a dark gap wide enough for a man to crawl through. Inside, faint air moved outward, carrying a low hum like electricity running through wet cable. The Major checked his watch, then looked at us. We go to the second junction, no farther, he said. We tied off a line and entered single file. My light caught old timbers slick with moisture. Every few feet, water dripped from overhead, striking the floor with that same rhythm we'd heard in the radio. I stopped once to catch my breath and felt the air moving against my cheek. It pulsed faintly, 3 seconds steady, then one pause. At the first junction, the walls widened. I noticed old markings. White paint faded with time unit numbers from some mining crew long gone. Next to one, a fresh line of chalk curved toward the left shaft. The Major knelt and studied it. He said, they knew which way to go. We turned left. The ground sloped down. My boots slid in the mud. The smell of metal grew stronger, almost sweet now. Davis whispered that the walls looked new, too clean. I shined my light and saw they'd been scrubbed clear, like someone had washed them. No dust, no mold. Only smooth stone with streaks of damp salt. After about 200 yards, we reached the second junction. A heavy silence filled the space. The tick came faint and regular from deeper inside. The Major unclipped the case and set it on the ground. He looked at me. Whatever you see now, you keep it quiet until we're clear, he said. He broke the seal with his knife. The latch clicked. When he opened it, I expected to see documents or electronics. Instead, there was a dull metal sphere the size of a canteen, scratched and pitted. Thin wires coiled around it, frayed at the ends. A faint glow shimmered across its surface like static. He didn't touch it. That was pulled from spruce knob, he said softly. A relay core. It shouldn't still be active. Then came a sound from behind us, a single step in the dark. Davis swung his light toward it, but the beam hit only drifting dust. The Major shut the case and motioned us back. The tick from deeper inside grew louder, matching the pulse I could feel through the floor. Each beat shook the air a little more. We turned to retreat. That's when we saw them. 3 figures stood farther down the tunnel, half hidden by the dark. They didn't move, didn't raise their heads. Just stood there. Their clothes looked like flight suits, but darker, wet, and stiff. One had something glinting on his chest, a dog tag swinging slow. The Major froze. Danner, he called. No answer. The light flickered once, and when it came back, they were closer. Still not moving, but closer. My throat went dry. Davis lifted his shotgun, but the Major pushed it down. Don't, he whispered. They're not, he never finished. The air behind us rushed outward, a deep breath drawn through the tunnel. My ears popped. Then the figures stepped forward. Their faces were pale, stretched tight, eyes unfocused like they were looking past us. No blood, no wounds, just blank. One reached a hand toward the case, fingers trembling. The Major backed away, clutching it. The glow under the lid flared brighter, casting light on the walls. The tick turned into a steady tone that drilled through my skull. Davis fired once, the blast echoing through the shaft. When the smoke cleared, the figures were gone. Only footprints remained, shallow impressions leading deeper into the tunnel. The echo of the shot lingered for a long time, bouncing between the walls like the mine itself was breathing it back at us. The major slammed the case shut and shouted, "Out, now!" We ran blind, following the rope back. The light swung wild, catching wet stone and broken rails. Behind us, the tone shifted again, returning to its slow rhythm. Tick, 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 steady, patient. When we burst out into daylight, the fog was gone. Ruiz stood by the tree line, face white, rifle aimed. "I heard the shot," he said. "What the hell was that?" The major didn't answer. He looked at the mine mouth, now half collapsed, slate sliding down to seal it again. Then he looked at the case, its metal faintly vibrating in his hands. He said only, "We need to call an extraction." We climbed to higher ground, the radio silent at first. Then a clear signal came through, a voice smooth and clipped, "Package secure, maintain isolation." The major confirmed, short and calm. He never said what we'd seen. That night, as we waited for the pickup bird, the forest stayed silent. I could still feel the faint tremor under my boots, like something moving far beneath the ridge. The tick had followed us out. We waited on the ridge until the sun dropped behind the trees. The air had that faint charge again, like before a storm. The major kept pacing, radio in one hand, the sealed case in the other. Ruiz sat on a stump, quiet, eyes on the valley below. Davis smoked without lighting it, just chewing the filter, staring into nothing. No one spoke about what we saw inside the mine. It sat in the air between us, thick as the fog. The pickup bird was late. The major said the coordinates had changed twice since he sent them. Command told him to hold position. He didn't like that, neither did I. I could feel a faint vibration under my boots again, as if something was running through the ground, steady and deep. As night fell, a light blinked in the hollow below, the same pale glow we'd seen before. It came and went in even intervals, like a pulse. Ruiz said it lined up with the radio ticks. The major turned the handset up. The tick had come back, slow and heavy, filling the space between us. Then the voice broke through the static. Calm, steady, the same one we'd heard in the mine. It said, "Hold for retrieval." Ruiz dropped the handset. I felt the air shift. From the valley floor, movement stirred. Not fast, not violent, just slow shapes, stepping between the trees, following the slope upward. The glow behind them pulsed brighter each time they moved. We could see outlines now, 4 figures, walking in line, matching the crew's size and build. Danner in front, I was sure of it. The major raised his rifle but didn't fire. "Stay still," he said. His voice was low but certain. "They're not coming for us." The wind picked up, carrying the same burnt sweet smell from the mine. My throat went dry. Davis swore under his breath and checked his shotgun. "Sir, they're not stopping." The figures kept climbing. The closer they came, the clearer they looked. Flight suits faded, faces pale and fixed, eyes open but empty. Their steps didn't match the terrain. It was like their boots found purchase on air. When they reached the tree line, they stopped. Danner, or what looked like him, tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something we couldn't hear. Then he raised one hand and pointed at the case. The major stepped forward. "You can't have it," he said softly, not into the radio, not to us, just out loud, as if answering an order. He opened the case again. The light inside pulsed brighter, same rhythm as the ticks. Ruiz yelled for him to stop, but it was too late. The air snapped like static, and the pulse turned into a tone so deep it made the ground quiver. The figures didn't move closer, they only watched. The light flared once, blinding white, then went out. When my vision cleared, the ridge was empty. The figures were gone. The case lay open on the ground, the sphere inside cracked down the center, leaking a faint mist that drifted like breath. The major was kneeling beside it, staring at his hands. His radio hissed softly, repeating a single phrase over and over, "Signal received." He closed the lid and stood. "We're leaving," he said. His voice was flat, final. We moved fast after that. No one looked back toward the hollow. I remember the sound of our boots on wet leaves, the forest too quiet, the smell of hot metal following us all the way up the ridge. The tick didn't stop this time. It faded slowly, sinking with the pace of our steps until I couldn't tell if it was still there or if my body had learned its rhythm. By the time we reached the extraction point, the fog had rolled back in. A black helicopter waited, rotors idling slow, no markings. The crew wore plain flight suits and helmets without unit tags. No greetings, no questions. The major handed the case to one of them, who took it wordlessly and loaded it aboard. The flight back was silent. No one looked out the windows. The major sat beside me, staring straight ahead, eyes red, jaw tight. I asked him quietly what we'd seen. He said, "It was just a relay test. Forget it." Then he turned away. When we landed at the guard airfield, there were no debriefs, no med check, just orders to turn in our gear and stand down. The case was taken off the helicopter and loaded into a truck marked with a unit code I didn't recognize. It drove east toward the hills without lights. Later that night, I checked my notebook. The last entry I'd written in the mine had smudged as if the page had been damp. Beneath it, in faint pencil lines that weren't mine, someone had written a single phrase, "Pre-flight complete." I closed the book and put it away. None of us talked again after that. Ruiz left the guard. Davis moved out west. The major disappeared into a transfer that never showed in records. Sometimes at night, when the wind cuts low through the hills, I still hear the rhythm. Faint, steady even. Not in the air inside my chest, behind the heartbeats. I don't think it ever stopped. They kept us at the base for one more night in separate quarters. No questions, no written reports. Just long hours waiting under bright lights while men in plain uniforms moved past the doors without speaking. My uniform still smelled like the mine, coal, oil, and that faint chemical sweetness that had burned into the fabric. I sat there on the cot, boots still wet, thinking about how clean the bird had been when we found it. It wasn't a crash site. It was a delivery. By morning, I was told to sign a confidentiality statement. A clerk in civilian clothes handed me a folder. His tone was even, practiced. "For operational security," he said. "You acknowledge that the mission never occurred." He didn't look up. The paper was already dated and stamped. I signed it. Everyone did. They gave us 2 weeks rest orders. No after-action brief, no metal paperwork, just leave forms. When I tried to check the mission code in the maintenance log, the entry had been replaced with a different flight number, same day, same time, but listed as a canceled weather drill. The tail number of the downed chopper didn't exist anymore. I called Ruiz that night. He sounded rough. He said he'd been contacted by someone asking about his radio gear, claiming to be from Supply Command. When he checked the caller's number later, it didn't trace anywhere. He told me he was done, that whatever we'd stepped into wasn't our business anymore. He meant it. He quit the next week. 2 days later, Davis left a voicemail I never deleted. He said the major had come by his house without warning. He didn't say what they talked about, only that the man looked different, older, thinner, like he hadn't slept since that night. A few weeks after that, Davis moved out west and stopped returning calls. I stayed in the guard for another year. Every few months, a new directive came down about updated reporting procedures, new forms, new clearance channels. The case from the mine was never mentioned, but once, during an inventory at the hangar, I found a crate marked with the same transfer code I'd seen on the truck. It was empty except for a lead seal stamped "Return to Origin." The paperwork inside was blank. The mine itself was sealed again before winter. The local news said it had collapsed from erosion. When I drove out there, a fresh layer of slate covered the entrance. The fire tower was gone too, cut down to the base. No markers, no signs. Only a patch of ground darker than the soil around it, like the earth had been scorched in a perfect circle. I remember kneeling by the creek where we'd first seen the footprints. The water still ran clear, but the mud smelled faintly metallic even after the rain. I found one small piece of foil in the grass, a gum wrapper folded neat, edges sharp. I don't know why I kept it, but I did. When I pressed it between my fingers, it gave off that same faint heat I'd felt in the mine. Back at the airfield, the chatter was quiet but steady. Some said the mission was tied to a communications test for the old Cold War network buried under the mountains. Others said it was something else, an experiment in signal transfer, man to machine. Nobody had proof. I only knew what I'd seen: 4 crewmen who walked away from a chopper that landed itself, a sealed case humming with its own rhythm, and orders that came from nowhere we could trace. I started keeping notes again, but not in a logbook. Just fragments on loose pages. The smell, the timing, the way the tick matched distance more than seconds. I realized after a while that it wasn't random. It had a purpose. Each interval shifted by a pattern not counting up or down, but pointing. Always towards something. Sometimes, when the wind blew from the south, radios at the hangar would pick up a faint signal. A single word repeated, too soft to register on recorders. It sounded like "stand." Nobody else seemed to hear it, or maybe they pretended not to. After a while, I stopped trying to explain. Some things in service you just learn to leave buried. A month later, I was called to Charleston for what they called a routine check-in. The building wasn't guard property, no flags, no signs, just gray walls and quiet halls. A man in a dark suit met me in the lobby. He said he wanted to clarify the timeline. No notes, no recorder. He just asked where I'd been between certain hours, what I'd seen, who I'd spoken to. Every time I mentioned the crew, he steered me back to logistics. When it ended, he smiled and said, "You did your job." Then he handed me a folder with one page inside, a photo of the downed Black Hawk taken from above, no figures in frame. At the bottom, someone had typed, "Recovered, no location." No date. Driving home, I felt like the forest had followed me. The ridges on the horizon looked the same as the ones near the mine. That night, I heard the faint tick again, low through the walls, steady as breath. I turned off every radio, every clock, but it kept on. A few days later, I got word that the major had been reassigned to a joint task group out east. No one knew which branch owned it. 2 months after that, he was listed as retired. I never saw him again. By winter, I'd stopped checking the radio. I thought maybe distance would dull it, that if I stayed away from those ridges long enough, the sound would fade. But one night, when snow buried the town and power went out, I stepped outside and heard it again. Not in any machine, but in the stillness itself. A slow, patient rhythm echoing under the hills. It wasn't calling. It was waiting. Years have passed since then. I left the guard, sold my gear, and moved closer to Elkins. I fix small engines now, nothing that flies. The woods behind my house are quiet most days, but when the fog settles, it feels like that ridge again. Same weight in the air, same smell of metal and rain mixed together. I still have the grease pencil I carried and one page from the old logbook. The lines are faded, but the mark of that last tick pattern is clear. I've tried to forget it, but sometimes, when the house is silent, I catch myself tapping the same rhythm on the table without thinking. 3 short, 1 pause. Always the same. I never saw the crew again. Their families got the standard letters. Closed casket, presumed lost. The official story said the chopper burned after impact, which we both know never happened. Maybe that was the easiest way for everyone to live with it. Easier than saying a machine landed itself, waited, and someone came to meet it. Sometimes I drive the old forest road past where the tower stood. There's nothing left. Just a patch of low grass and the sound of water somewhere under the ground. I stop, listen, and count the gaps between each faint echo. It's always even. I've told no one else this story. Maybe it's better that way. The hills can keep their secrets. They've had practice. Still, every time I hear that rhythm again, I wonder if the signal ever stopped, or if we only walked out of its range. If anyone ever finds another downed chopper in those mountains, don't call it wreckage. Check if the rotors are tied down, then walk away. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And for more amazing horror stories, just click the ones showing right now on your screen.